Down a seat. I can see there's quite a few seats here available for those of you who are in the back standing. But we'd like to get started with the program. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Michelle Perkins. I'm the president of New England College. And I'm pleased to welcome everyone to today's town hall meeting with New Hampshire Department of Education Commissioner Frank Edelblut. New England College is proud of its tradition of hosting town hall meetings, and the college has been presenting town hall meetings since 2000. These town hall meetings are designed for the thoughtful and respectful exchange of ideas about important issues of our day. Some of our town hall meetings have included discussions about public policy, forums for presidential, congressional, senatorial, gubernatorial, and state senate candidates, and formal debates between candidates running for public office. In fact, during the most recent U.S. presidential election cycle, New England College hosted a town hall meeting for every major candidate running for office. And it was a wonderful experience for us, and particularly for our students, to meet all the candidates. As a private, not-for-profit college, our town hall meetings support our larger educational mission, part of which emphasizes the critical importance of civic engagement. We believe it's essential for our students and our community to be engaged and knowledgeable about issues that affect them and our democracy, and that part of being an educated person is being active, involved, and informed citizens. I'd like to welcome and thank Commissioner Edelblut for coming to NEC, engaging with the community, and participating in today's town hall. We're pleased to have him on our campus. And we look forward to listening to and learning more about the Commissioner's vision for education and his priorities for the state, your questions, and the Commissioner's responses and thoughts. But to begin with, I'd like to introduce today's town hall moderator, Scott Spradling. Scott is a former reporter, anchor, and political director for WMUR-TV in Manchester, and founder of the Spradling Group. Scott.
Hi everybody, this is a very un-April type of day, so welcome on a Friday afternoon. If we could have retracted the roof of this building, I think we all would have voted unanimously to do so. It's absolutely gorgeous outside. We are thrilled to have such a wide variety of faces and voices here in this room. In fact, when we reached out to Commissioner Edelblut and asked about his interest and availability in being able to talk about what's happening in Concord, what's happening with public education and public schools, quite frankly, he was enthusiastic about jumping in and wanting to have that conversation. And then when we put it out to our greater Henniker and greater New England College community, we were surprised by the immediate response. So it is wonderful to have so many folks here in the room. And before we get started, I want to at least go over a couple of procedural issues about how we're going to handle this today. We're calling it a town hall meeting, but because we had so many folks RSVP, we had to actually stop the list because we ran out of space. And the way we're doing this in order to cover ground and try to get as many questions in as possible is that you were, when you were greeted at the door, you were handed some cards. And we asked you to start writing down your questions so that we could cover the territory as quickly as possible. So the way that we will do this is after the commissioner is introduced and has a chance to talk about his vision, some of the activities that he's involved in right now, and things that he's working on in Concord for the state of New Hampshire, we'll transfer over to the questions. I've already got a sizable pile of them. They are in right now the order in which I've essentially received them. I'm going to do the very best I can to get through every single one of them. Some of them, as I've seen so far, are repetitive. Some asking pretty much the same question on broad topics that are of focus right now, that will not surprise anyone in this room. But I invite all of you to continue writing down questions. And I know that as the commissioner is speaking, it may inspire some new questions. So Bob, where's Bob? There's Bob. So everybody say hi, Bob. Hi. Oh, good. So Bob is going to be the gentleman who will collect cards as they are coming through. If you've already written a question, feel free to raise your hand. We'll either pass them down the aisle or he'll grab them from you. He can get them right up to me, and we'll just keep on rolling. That way we can be productive and cover as much ground as possible. So again, thank you for being here, especially on a gorgeous 80-degree April day, which is ridiculously rare in New England. And so we will get started, and I would like now to introduce New England College senior Eileen Kelly, who will introduce Commissioner Edelblut. Eileen?
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. My name is Eileen Kelly. I'm a secondary education mathematics student here at New England College. Our campus has always strived to envelop our community with opportunities for civic engagement. Today, it is my esteemed privilege to introduce you to the man who is our new champion for New Hampshire's education system. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and Accounting and a Master's of Theological Studies. He has served on the New Hampshire House of Representatives Finance Committee, Special Committee on Pensions, and on the Child and Family Law Committee. Perhaps most importantly, he is a loving husband and a doting father of seven children.
Several.
Our speaker was sworn in as the Commissioner of the New Hampshire Department of Education on February 16, 2017, and ever since, he has aspired to strengthen and further develop the education our lovely state receives. As a vocal advocate for school choice and personalized education, he brings a fresh new take on education. And as an aspiring teacher myself, I am beyond excited to introduce you to our speaker today. Please join me in welcoming our Commissioner of the New Hampshire Department of Education, Mr. Frank Edelblut.
Very crowd. Thank you so much for coming out this afternoon. There are many other things you could be doing on a day like this, like golfing. Right, Gary? Have you thought about that? So I am excited to be here with you. I'm just talking a little bit to make sure he can settle the microphone down for you and it's not too much echo going on since we didn't check the mic first. But again, very excited to be here. You know, we are in a time of great change that is taking place in education today. Our lovely student up here is probably experiencing that in many of her classes. I like to describe this change as one that is moving education from the industrial age and transforming it into the information age. And let me describe for you a little bit about what that looks like to me and what I have seen as I have been out and visiting different schools throughout our state. And I have to tell you, we've got some great schools in New Hampshire, and I just appreciate the work that our teachers and our administrators are doing. Can I start out with a little round of applause for those people who are working so hard for our children? In the industrial model of education, educators were the possessors of content. And they would take this content and they would deliver it to their, open and able students. Let's say there's 30 students in the room and the educator is providing this information. Inevitably what would happen is that 10 students would get the information, 10 might get about half of it, 10 wouldn't get too much, but the bell would ring and we would move on. And this cycle would repeat itself in our industrial model of education. In the information age, education and information in particular, has become ubiquitous. It is all over the place. There must be at least a dozen cell phones filming me right now that are capable of looking up all kinds of information. So in this era of ubiquitous information, the role of the educator has changed. And this became really clear to me the other day. I was touring through a middle school in our state with the principal, and we stuck our head into a social studies class. As I often do on my tours, I tend to open the doors and stick my head in and engage with the students and talk to them. And this particular occasion, the principal, as we entered into the room, realized that they were studying a particular era of history. And the principal says, "Does anybody know something about so-and-so?" And honestly, it was a pretty obscure person in history. And I think he imagined that no one would know anything, right? But some young lady shoots up her hand. And she goes, "I know about him." And she begins to list off all kinds of information about this relatively obscure person in history. The principal was a little bit shocked and says, "How do you know all this information?" The little girl goes, "Oh, well, I saw a special on Netflix." And it was at that point that it became so clear to me that there is a shift that has taken place. This poor educator is up there trying to be more engaging for that student, right? So this is what you're going to have to do, be more engaging to those students than Netflix, and you're going to have richer content than Netflix in terms of what you're able to provide to the student. And it became clear at that moment, and someone's phone's going off over there, it became clear at that moment that the role of the educator has shifted. No longer do they have the luxury of being and living in the industrial age where they possess content and they provide content to students. They now need to be able to mentor students to learn how to curate information and to make that information formative so that it can be useful. Because we all know that the amount of content of information is incredible, and it assaults all of our senses every single day. Now, I have had the opportunity to get out and to visit in a lot of schools, and I have to tell you, that's the best part of my job. I tell people on a regular basis, I shouldn't be allowed to have this much fun in what I'm doing. But it's great, whether it is, I got a picture texted to me the other day. Executive Counselor Joe Kenny was with me yesterday up in Haverhill, and he took a picture of me. I'm not sure I want to release this picture because I'm crawling around on the floor in kindergarten in my suit. What do you think? Should I let that one go out?
Absolutely.
So it's what I'm out there and I'm visiting, and there's two areas that I try to talk to the educators and the administrators about, because I think these are two critical components as we begin to continue to push the envelope of innovation in New Hampshire. Now, many of you may not know this, but New Hampshire has been quite innovative in education. We have been a leader across the country and in some respects around the world in terms of some of the things that we are doing in education. And so people are a little bit nervous. They're like, we got a new guy in there. What's he doing? Pushing the envelope. Well, what I'll tell you is I want to make sure we stay first in the world and in the nation in terms of the education. So I will continue to encourage innovation and creativity, especially that stuff which I see as I visit schools and I'm so encouraged by. But the two messages, the first one that I try to engage the teachers and the administrators on is I talk to them about parent voice in the education system. Now, inevitably, I'll ask them, so tell me about parent voice in your particular system. And the educators will immediately, it seems, gravitate to what I would refer to as parental engagement. So they will talk to me about the barbecues that they have and how they're able to get parents to come out for a movie night or to participate in some other event that's taking place in the school. And those are really great and important things to engage parents. But it's not exactly what I mean when I talk about parent voice. When I talk about parent voice, what I'm interested in is trying to find ways to engage parents substantively in the education of their children so that they have, I like to call it, skin in the game. And there are some decent examples around our state in terms of what people are doing. They're trying to be creative because they recognize that if I can engage that parent by helping them have substantive engagement in their students' education, that they're going to be more interested in the success of their student, and they will be more interested in the success of the school that their student attends. What this looks like in one district is a district that has 6 elementary schools. Now, in this particular district, the superintendent allows the parents' voice to say, you can go send your child to any one of those 6 elementary schools in the district. You pick the one that you want. Inevitably, most parents choose the neighborhood school, which is where probably you would expect them to pick and where they're most comfortable. But there are parents who, maybe grandma and grandpa live in another community, and so they want their child over there so they can be picked up after school. Or maybe another parent works in another community and feels more comfortable to have their student near them. It doesn't really matter what it is, because even if they choose the local community school, if there is any kind of an issue associated with the education of their child, and they have to come in and they have to meet with the administration, it's a different conversation that takes place. Because now they're saying, well, that parent chose that school. There were 5 other places that they could have sent their child, but they chose that school. And so they have skin in the game in terms of determining where their child will go to school. And they are engaged and have voice in that process, and I believe are more apt to support both the efforts of the child and the efforts of the school. So parent voice is something that I ask about wherever I go. The other area that I tend to focus on is personalization of education. And many of you probably have heard me talk about personalization of education. I sometimes refer to it as N of 1. And this is just the mathematical expression that recognizes that children are different. You know, when you first have a child, and I know there's many parents in here, you know, you have your child, and you're a new parent, and you're all nervous, and you're worried about it, right? And so what you realize is that some children walk at 9 months. Some other children, they walk when they're 14 months old. And we get all nervous about this, and we go to the pediatrician, we say, like, is everything okay? Are they developing all right? And the pediatrician just says, oh, just calm down, it's okay. Children develop at different rates, right? They different paces. You know, some students, some children are verbal when they're 18 months old, my daughter, right? My son, took him till he was 3 years old before he was verbal. And you go to the pediatrician and you say, you know, is everything okay? And the pediatrician says to you, it's okay, children develop at different rates. Well, those children don't stop developing at different rates when we get them into the school system. They grow at different rates, they develop at different rates, and so we need an education system that recognizes that the students are coming into the system at different levels of development, at different educational stages, and we need a system that can accommodate where those students are so that we can meet them where they are and move them on. It's not good enough to go back to this industrial age model that says we provided you content. I was at a meeting last night and there was a gentleman who had been through school for many years ago. I'm being polite there, right? Okay. And he was explaining how, you know, school was not that good for him. He was in that third group of 10 that he just kind of got moved along. And it wasn't until he got into his 20s that he realized how much he loved learning. But that the environment that he was in there just was not doing it for him. And so what I want to tell you is, when I talk about personalization, I say, tell me how you are trying to personalize the educational opportunities for your students. And I have to tell you, there are a ton of creative and exciting and innovative practices that are taking place in the school systems, and those are the ones that we want to celebrate. I will also tell you that it's a little lumpy. You know, some places are doing some great creative things, and other places not so much. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that everybody is providing those great opportunities. Let me describe some of them to you. And I will tell you that, you know, in terms of lumpiness, it is not a socioeconomic phenomenon that changes whether it's either strong or not strong. You can go into you know, communities that have high socioeconomic demographics, and they maybe are not as creative and innovative, and you can go into some that are low that have some of the best and most creative things taking place. I was in a elementary school recently, and this school has basically begun blending classes. They hold their classes as like K through 2, and they've got a 1 through 3, and they've got a 2 through 5. And they are putting students in the classes grouped not based upon how old the students are, but based on where the students are in terms of development, and where they are learning, and what they are accomplishing. It was interesting, in that particular school, I heard a story. There was a young child who, you know, in the traditional vernacular is in kindergarten. Someone asked the student, what grade are you in? And the little student said, I'm in first grade. Because the kid doesn't know what grade he's in, he just knows what he's learning, right? And that's what's important at that age. He's not supposed to be worrying about that. But this is a school that is trying to be creative and is in one of our most difficult socioeconomic areas in the state. And they are working on this. Tell you about another class, another you know, experience that I had in our classroom, and I thought that this was really poignant because a lot of times we hear, you know, pushback, and everybody's concerned about, but what about class size, right? Have anybody ever heard that? Well, what about class size? We need smaller classes. Well, I say to you, what is a class these days? Because I'm in a particular classroom, and there's a teacher, and there's an aide, and there's 30 students. Actually, there's a few less than 30 students. But this classroom was not organized that you had rows of desks and a teacher providing information, but had different learning stations in the particular classroom. And the day that I was there, what I observed was that they were working on math at the time. There you go. And the teacher's aide had a group of 6 students around the table and was introducing a concept to them. A mathematical concept, and laying it out for them using some manipulatives to make it, you know, tangible for them so that they could grasp hold of it and understand. You know, after about 15 or 20 minutes of that, the kids took a little bit of a break, and then they rotated to the next station. And at this next station, these same students logged onto their Chromebooks, And on their Chromebooks, they logged on to a Khan Academy lesson that was going to reinforce the very lessons that these students had just learned. You know, same content, but presented a little bit differently. Because in case some of the learning didn't catch on that first go-around, maybe some of it would catch on this next go-around. And then again, after a session there, they moved on to the next table. And here they were sitting with the educator, and the educator was having the students work out the concepts on paper. And as she explained it to me, she was trying to assure that the cognitive understanding was really deep here, that the students understood the process that was taking place, the actual learning that was taking place. And so she was reinforcing and correcting misunderstandings for those students. And then when they finished there, they would rotate to the next station. And in this particular school, they were using iReady, but there's a lot of other tools out there, and they're back on their little Chromebooks. And they're doing a formative assessment that determines, did they catch it? Did they understand what was being taught? Are they really ready? And then what will happen is after those students do that formative assessment, those that got it are going to spin up in the learning cycle and start to tackle some new standards. And those that are not ready to move on are going to cycle back through, and they are going to have those concepts reinforced until they master them, so that they can then move on. Because honestly, if we just push the students along without ensuring that the learning has taken place, have we actually done them any favors? I was in a school just recently, and it's high school, and the principal was telling me they have a student, it's her fourth time through Algebra 1. 4 years. I'm like, that's all the high school years that they have, isn't it? Right? And she's like, you know what? If I can get this kid through Algebra 1 solid, right? Because he's been struggling. She's like, I don't want to just push him on, because if I take him from Algebra 1 and he's only got half the concept, and I put him in Algebra 2, he's only going to get 25% of that, and then I put him into geometry or trig. It's just, he's not going to get better just because we continue to advance him. She's like, I will do better by trying to help this student master Algebra 1 before he leaves here. Because when he gets to community college, I don't want him to have to take a remediation course. I want him to know these concepts and to understand them and to apply them and to make them his own, really. And so there's an example of trying to make sure, that's what mastery learning is, that's what personalization is, saying we will move you along as you are ready to tackle the new material. I want to tell you another, I hope I get this line right. Yesterday, I was up at a school, and I was meeting with the student council. They were all there. And this is a school that has a CTE center connected with it or associated with it. And the student said something to me that it struck me wrong. It just didn't seem right. And I feel bad for the student. I feel bad that I'm using him as an example now, but you don't know who he is. But he said to me, he says, you know, the impression that people have is that students who go to our CTE centers, they don't do very well at school. And I thought, well, that's a terrible way to say that. Just to me, they don't do very well at school. And so I said, I'd like to reverse that. You know, what I would like to say is, as you know, maybe schools don't do very well for that student, right? In other words, like, is it the student that didn't do well in school, or is it the school that didn't do well for the student? And so that, again, coming back to that N of 1, to recognize that students are different. They learn differently, they develop differently, they develop at different paces in different ways, and we, as educators, need to be able to create an environment in which every student is able to get to the top of their game. And those are the things, those are the messages that I am emphasizing as I am out and I am visiting in the schools. And I've got a lot of other projects going on, but I want to tell you of one more that kind of became apparent to me as I jumped into this role. You're all educators, so you get this, right? But there's an alphabet soup out there, isn't there? You know, like you guys come up with lots of different acronyms for all different kinds of things. So I'm trying to come up to speed. There's all kinds of programs. And so I thought to myself, like, wow, this is tough to kind of wrap your head around. Where's a framework? I need some kind of a framework that I can categorize and see what's happening. And that one thing leads to another thing. And what I realized, and what I think is important is, I'm working on what I call my vertical integration project. And my vertical integration project is basically saying, well, like, my responsibility, I'm dealing with K through 12. But, you know, just because I'm through K through 12 doesn't mean that those students aren't going to be continuing on, right? Whether it's the community college system, whether it's in the university system, and really, all of us eventually continue on into the workplace. So can we create some type of a framework that has common vernacular that allows all of us to communicate about education and education opportunities and the direction that we are moving in a common framework that is vertically integrated. So I have begun the process of working with community college, and I hope to be down here at New England College, and and continue that process so that we are all on the same page of understanding, education is really a lifetime activity, isn't it? I mean, for me it is. I mean, somebody mentioned here I got my master's degree. They didn't mention that only happened a couple of years ago, right? So we all need to constantly be learning. We all need to be, willing to engage new things. And so that's kind of the, for lack of a better term, that is the spirit that I want to inject into and help, cultivate more and more of in the education system. And so I just appreciate the opportunity to come out this afternoon and to talk with you. And I know that you've got lots of questions for me, so I'm happy to try and address those. Thank you so much again for coming out, and I appreciate it.
So we have several questions. And again, thank you everyone for your attentiveness and for what I know from my experience in hosting events like these is a room full of really good behavior. So thank you for that, and I appreciate that we can continue that. There are some really great questions here. I have a lot of them. I'm going to try to get through them as best I can, covering a lot of different topics.
Yeah, I thought I had to get through the questions.
That's true. Yes. So yes, we're sure. So let's start. Let's start with this right now. What strategies do you have for keeping education graduates in New Hampshire?
Right, so that is a great question in terms of keeping education graduates in New Hampshire. What I will tell you is I can do so much, and this vertical alignment project might be a good step in that direction, because I have them in K-12, and what I will tell you is in the K-12 system, we have a lot of vocational tech through our CTE centers, opportunities for students to get the skills to leave high school ready to join the workforce. In other words, they've got capabilities, because maybe everyone is not destined for college. Maybe everyone's not destined for college right away. Maybe they need a couple of years of working, something like a couple of years of working to they realize how much you really want to go back to college, right? And so we have CTE programs in the state that are able to equip our students to take jobs here in New Hampshire. I was looking at a proposal just earlier today for one of our CTE centers. And we spend a lot of time looking at the different kinds of programs that we offer in there. And I will tell you, there was a program that was listed there. That, it's a vocational program. And I said, why are we offering that? I don't think that there's demand for that in the marketplace. And so we're going to go back and we're going to look at some market data and make sure that we're trying to provide educational opportunities in the CTE program that are going to lead to some type of vocational opportunity for the students once they get beyond that point.
A number of questions that you have asked were coming in as the commissioner was speaking. So these may bounce around a little bit. I'm going to try to reflect them as they were coming in, but also as you submitted them early. Here's one that we got while you were talking. Given the fact that we are indeed in the information age, information overload, critical thinking skills are vitally important. To be able to discern whether the information we access is valid and reliable, what can schools do to foster critical thinking?
So again, it comes back to the changing role of the educator, right? They're shifting from being the content expert to being the mentor that facilitates students so that they know how to curate information. And when I talk about curating information, is how do you figure out what's good data and what's bad data, right? And then, even if you can figure out what's good data and bad data, how do you take that information and make it formative, make it useful so that you can actually do something with it and make it productive in your own life? So that's really the role, the shifting role I see for the educators.
How does your vision promote access, equity, and no ma'am? We have so many no ma'am, but thank you for that. I do appreciate it. I will say that I think a number of these questions, and some, like I said, there might be some repetition. I will go through because I want to do justice to the questions that are written down and asked by the audience. So in some cases we may bounce around and come back. There may be some follow-ups to what this was. I have other information age-related questions, but to just try to keep things paced and moving forward for
and I'll try and keep it moving too.
Sure, absolutely.
Unless you guys want me to go for a little.
So all right, so I believe there are some college students from NEC who are here. How does your vision promote access, equity, and retention? That's actually the name of a class that's here today listening to you.
Yep, so what I would tell you is, and particularly in the area of equity, because I run into this on a regular basis, and equity is an important thing. Just before I answer that question specifically, I want to tell you about one of our schools. There's a charter school in one of our most difficult communities in the state. And this charter school has 4 open slots for students. These are public charter schools, so you have to, there's a lottery system whereby you get to do it. You know, we had 259 students apply for that slot in one of our most economically challenged areas. When I talk about personalization of learning, it really is trying to expand that opportunity window. And that expansion takes place at the top end, so that we have students who are not held back, but they are able to accelerate. One of the things that I have heard 3 times, I'm going to probably try and keep count of this, that just breaks my heart, is I'll be in a middle school, and I'll talk to the educator, and they'll talk about some stellar student that they have. And I'll be like, well, what do you do to try and help that student move along, like give them additional opportunities? And the educator, 3 occasions so far, said to me, I tell them, wait until you get to high school. Oh, kills me, right? In other words, we don't want these students waiting till they get to high school to learn. We want to be able to grab those opportunities today and move forward. You know, I'm in another school, and I can tell you there's many of these examples. Just yesterday I was in a school, and I had a 6th grade student who'd already completed Algebra 1, which is the math course that they offer in 9th grade in high school. And so there's a school that said, you know, if we've got to blow the top off, if you've got a student who's going to run ahead, we want to make sure that we provide that opportunity for them to run ahead like that. But really where the equity piece of this comes about is at that lower level. And do you realize that many of these students, they're stuck in generational poverty. And education may be the only opportunity that they have to break free from that. But the problem is, you know, that in that industrial model, you know, these are students who don't have a whole bunch of supports at home. They don't have a bunch of structure that's going to help them get there. And so through personalization of those learning opportunities, I want to make sure that every student gets that opportunity to reach their best possible outcome through the education system, and that we're not passing them on. And when I talk about that, when I think about you know, the support structures that students have at home, and right now, and this probably will change, and many of you probably have other frameworks, but I think of 3 circles that kind of extend outward. You know, in that first circle and this is kind of the parent support group, we'll call it, are folks that many of you know, if you're an educator. These are the parents who show up all the time. They're already always asking questions. You know, they're not afraid to engage the system. They are right there every day demanding, like, what are you doing for my kid, right? And then there's the next group out, and these are folks for whom school may not have been a great experience, right? They didn't do that well in school, and so they're a little tentative about engaging that system. You know, we talked earlier about parental voice. They're tentative about expressing their voice in that system because they don't know if they're allowed, they don't know what it looks like, they're a little afraid of the system, quite frankly. Getting called to the principal's office is not a good experience, right? And so these are some of these parents that, again, from an equity standpoint, we have to help them get engaged so that they can move forward. And then we have our most, you know, the outer ring. I refer to this as the ring of tragedy. And many of you know that there are stories out there of tragedy for children, you know, not just in New Hampshire, but everywhere. And this is a special group of students that we need to do what we can to help to bring these students along.
What is your opinion on state funding for higher education? Do you support increasing the level of funding there?
Right, so I'm going to talk about funding for a second. First of all, I don't have magic, you know, I call it Claremont fairy dust to solve the education funding issues in New Hampshire. But here's one of the things I think I want to think about relative to this. What I find oftentimes when I'm having conversations with folks is we tend to conflate funding and academic or pedagogy. And I like to bifurcate these because what I will tell you is, again, I don't have the solutions for the education funding in New Hampshire to tell you this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to solve, you know, what is inevitably going to be you know, it is an increasing amount of tension among taxpayers and the funding for education. But what I will tell you is on the academic and the pedagogical side, we have a whole bunch of things that we can do in this domain with the resources that we have, because I've seen it happening in our schools, just some of the stories that I've described to you. You know, it's just a different arrangement, a different focus of those resources. So what I am focusing my efforts on are the things that I can help influence and I can help and support our schools with, and that is going to be with these academic and pedagogical things, and to the extent that I can somehow, you know, help out with the financing, I'm happy to do that, but not really a role of the Department of Education.
But can I
to that extent, there is a funding. Ma'am, I appreciate that, but if you start, then everyone starts, and it's really not fair to the process. Commissioner, as a follow-up because there are a number of questions that have to do with funding of higher education. So how will public schools be supported if you take away money from some of them?
So is this a SB 193 question? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So
Can you explain what SB 193?
I will. I'll lay this out.
Yeah, and there are a number of questions about that too.
Yeah, so why don't I can I do my
Please do.
demo on
Yeah,
that? Yeah, I'll
please do.
explain this one for you guys, okay. So again, here's the tagline, which every time I talk about this, I make sure I put out there, which is that I represent the Department of Education, and the Department of Education does not take positions on legislation. But I'm happy to explain to you some of the details in terms of how that will work. What is being referred to is sometimes discussed as the voucher bill. Its proper name, and I'm using the vernacular from the actual legislation, is Education Freedom Savings Accounts. And what this account or this legislation was trying to accomplish, and so if anybody understands the status, I believe that has been retained in the Education Committee at this point in time. So what this program is, according to the legislation, is an opt-in program. An opt-in program is a program in which a parent comes to their school district and says, I want to opt out of one thing and I will opt into the Education Freedom Savings Account. It is a program that is not completely dissimilar to programs that exist in Nevada and exist in Arizona and exist in Florida, most developed in Florida. In the states where these other programs are being used, you have about a 2% take-up rate. And that means that about 2% of families actually opt into those programs. They make the decision, say, I will choose to participate in that program. Interestingly, a recent study showed that the individuals who decide to opt in tend to be lower socioeconomically, so just another demographic aspect of it. And the way that this program works is it is available to public school students, homeschool students, and students who are entering the public education system for the first time. In other words, so you're a kindergartner and you can opt in at that point in time. And I think that that's an important distinction to make, because oftentimes what we hear is that this is available to private school students when, in fact, the way that the legislation was written, it is for public school students who, for whatever reason, the system is not meeting their needs, so they are making a choice saying, like, I'm going to opt out of this and try and find another educational option for my students or for my children, depending on who it is. And again, it's a relatively small number of folks at this point in time who seem to be opting into that program. So that's how that works.
But it uses public dollars to pay for the private schools, correct?
So the way the public funding works now is that in public schools, we have what's referred to, so public schools, we spend about $4 billion a year on the K-12 system. About $1 billion of that money comes from, it's referred to as state money, and about $3 billion of that money is your local property taxes. Now, just to be clear, in the $1 billion of state money is $363 million of your SWEP, or your statewide property tax money, too. I think that's important to point out, because that's actually property tax, too. But because of its collection mechanism, it actually is state tax revenue, even though it's a property tax. So that's the total picture in terms of what happens. The way that education is funded is we have the adequacy grants that are provided per student. So we have an ADM, so we calculate the average daily membership in the school, so that's per student. And we provide to each public school about $3,600 per student, and then what we provide is what's referred to as differentiated aid. So if a student qualifies for free and reduced lunch, that district gets an additional amount of money. And it's important to know, when we talk about the free and reduced lunch, it's not to provide the lunch as much as it is an attempt to recognize that sometimes with free and reduced populations, the delivery of education can be more difficult, so you need an additional amount of money, just so that we don't differentiate to think it's lunch money.
So, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but as a follow-up to this?
Yes.
There
Well,
are-
I was going to go through the rest, but okay.
Because I think this might help in
go for it.
the narrative here, because I have a number of school choice related questions that
Yeah.
I think they're all over the place, so I'm going to try to sort of summarize some of them. The questions that I'm getting have a lot to do with concerns about, for example, that it doesn't develop into an unequal system, that it is helping the rural and perhaps impoverished geographies of the state, whether or not it can or cannot be used for homeschooling. There's curiosity there. What research leads to it, like where is it going on perhaps elsewhere, and then in terms of local adequacy funds as a source of financial hardships, why that focus if there's already communities that are struggling. What does this do? And how do we measure? Like how do we prevent a system like this to end up with schools or school systems that fall well below our expectations of basic standards?
Yep. So then let me just finish. That is and some of those I think I've kind of addressed.
Agreed.
But that is a lot. So let me just continue. So we've got adequacy money. So 3,600 for free and reduced. Special ed population, English language learners. So these are all differentiated aid amounts that get added to the funding formula, as well as students who test deficient in reading in 3rd grade. The next year, that school district gets $675 extra, right? And so this is the funding that takes place. So a student who opts out of the system vis-a-vis an education freedom savings account, the $3,600 that was normally provided to that public school for that student, that $3,600 follows that, and it's actually, there's another formula, but just for all practical purposes, I'm simplifying. That $3,600 then is provided to that student to be able to use in another education setting of their choosing. And so essentially what happens is that a school district, let's say that we've got this, the calculation we talked about, you got the $4 billion that we're talking about, or if I just break it down, you've got an average New Hampshire education costs about $15,000 per student. Say about $10,000 of that comes from local property tax, $5,000 of it's associated with state money, although that does include the SWEP. So when that student leaves a school district, the $10,000 stays in the school, the $5,000 follows the student and is used in the Education Freedom Savings Account. So that student is no longer in the system, and 1/3 of that funding would follow them according to the way that bill is structured.
Commissioner, what does the transportation network look like to be able to move the students around should we end up in a system where there is more choice? I'm seeing a number of questions like, it sounds good, but given New Hampshire's geography, how is the model practical?
So what happens is if a student, and again, this is what's in the bill, I'm just trying to relate to you. So in the bill, when a student opts out of that public education system into the Education Freedom Savings Account, they walk away from the responsibilities, the transportation responsibilities associated with that. They also, at that point in time, walk away from some of the special education responsibilities and obligations of the local school district, as well as some other things.
Could you please address how you would help students who aren't achieving what they could be, or that they have additional academic needs? And I have a feeling that falls into what you're talking about.
This is personalization, all right? And so basically, but again, we start in the public school systems, right? In other words, like that is where we are providing lots of opportunities for our students, and let's not lose sight of that. And so, we need to start, if we've got kids who are falling behind, we need to figure out where they are. In a personalized education system, we can identify them, we can figure out what their needs are, we can work on a personalized learning plan, and we can help move that student through that system. Sometimes, and I've seen, I haven't been there that long, but I've seen some opportunities where the system seems to be bending over backwards, doing everything they possibly can to help some students, and you just can't find the right combination of things. It seems to me that those are the application of this Education Freedom Savings Account, where the parents have just reached the end of the line. They're saying, it's just not working for whatever reason. I'm just going to go try something different, and so that's really what's happening. So.
What standards do you plan to enact to ensure the quality of education that New Hampshire students receive from schooling other than public schools, whether it's charter or religious, private, or homeschooling? Would it be accreditation for teachers, testing students to ensure competency? What does the standard look like?
Yep, so those standards are already on the books in terms of the quality of education. So public schools have certain rules that they have to abide by. Private schools have certain things. Homeschool students. So as all of you probably know, I home educated my own students. It's interesting when we talk about assessments. In home education, we do assessments every single year. We don't have a 3 through 8 and 11. We basically assess every single year, and that's just part of the law and part of the accountability structure that we have in New Hampshire. So again, there's not a plan to change that accountability system for the schools. There is some accountability stuff that we're working on, but not direct to that question.
After your recent visit to Franklin High School, what do you see, I'm glad you're nodding because that means you did,
I did
what
go
did
there.
you see as a way to revitalize the district and ensure adequate funding?
Again, so here's what happens is we keep conflating funding and pedagogical opportunities. So I told the folks in Franklin, I see some folks from Franklin right here now, right? I told the folks in Franklin that I didn't have, fairy dust, Claremont fairy dust to solve all of their education funding problems. This is that problem is far larger than the Department of Education and the Commissioner of Education. It involves the legislature, it involves the community to figure out that problem. What I did work on when I was in Franklin is to explore, and I thought it was a fairly productive brainstorming session of these pedagogical opportunities. Given these resources, how do we deploy these resources most effectively in order to make sure that every student has an opportunity to get to their best possible outcome?
New Hampshire deeply believes in progressive education in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. Focus on process standards and habits of the mind. Why do you put so much stock in the Fordham Foundation reports, given your belief in innovation and creativity in education?
Yeah, so I think that this is a reference to the fact that our science standards had a C rating from the Fordham Institute. And I appreciate whoever it is that wrote that question. But I also want to make sure that our students have the best possible opportunity. And what's really interesting is that Fordham, ranked our science standards a C, and we thought that was not a good, we said we were just somewhat dismissive potentially of that. Whereas in other circumstances, when Fordham has ranked our standards high, we say, look at that, Fordham gave us a really good rate. So I just think part of my responsibility legislatively, if you look at Roman numeral 10 under the duties of the commissioner, my responsibility there in law is that I am supposed to review on an ongoing basis, that is a quote out of the law, the standards in our state. And so I will do that because what we want to do is we want to continually be improving ourselves. In the business world, we talk all the time about continuous improvement. I was I had an opportunity to meet a former Commissioner of Education for Vermont the other day. And in that conversation, we spent a lot of time talking about the importance of continuous improvement in the education world as well. Like every day we want to wake up and ask ourselves, how can we continue to improve things and make things better for all of our students? And so those are the things that I'm focused on.
Do you believe in mainstreaming children with developmental disabilities? What are your specific policy stances?
So I believe that when mainstreaming happens, it's a really good thing. In other words, so I want to see opportunities for mainstreaming because I think, honestly, I think as we mainstream all students as much as possible, assuming that there's not a disruption, that we all it's better for all of our humanity. Because we're not, again, going back to personalization, all students are not supposed to be the same. Everybody is not the same person. And so I think if having a little variety is a really good thing for all of us, particularly in the classroom, as long as it isn't disruptive to the educational outcomes for the students.
Preschools are part of our public schools. How do you plan to support high-quality early childhood?
Yep, so preschools are in some of our public schools and not in some of our other public schools. I think on the preschool issue, and I know that the governor is excited about the kindergarten, activities that are taking place. What I want to emphasize for folks is, relative to that early childhood years, all of the studies will tell you that the best possible option is a great home family life. Where either mom or dad or grandma or grandpa or aunt or uncle or an extended family, whatever it is, are reading to the students, are engaging them, are talking to them, and engaging them in all kinds of interaction like that. That is how students learn. At that young age, students learn by play. They learn by engagement. They don't learn by digging into the books so much, right? That actually is not the best thing. So what we want to do is in all of our early childhood education, we need to make sure that we don't supplant the great work that parents are doing at home, but we need to recognize that not all family and home environments are like that. And so where that is the case, we want to make sure that we provide quality opportunities that will have the reading and the engagement and stuff like that for those students.
Commissioner, this is a follow-up to that on the issue of kindergarten. This questioner points out that the governor supports funding for full-day kindergarten. Do you support full-day kindergarten? And if not, then why not?
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter. I'm the implementation guy here, and I know that you guys don't necessarily like that terminology. Yeah. So, what I will tell you is that the governor is very excited about kindergarten. And what I will tell you is that I have committed to the governor that if that's his policy, I will implement it very well. And I do know something about implementing things well.
Commissioner, there are 180,000 children in New Hampshire public schools.
How many?
180,000.
172,000.
172,000. Most of their parents work during the day. Many rely on after-school programs. If the federal government ends funding for after-school programs, will you support state funding for them?
Again, let's separate. My job here is the pedagogical aspect. I know you guys all think that came with the checkbook here, but I will focus on pedagogical opportunities, and those funding questions I think are best addressed by the legislature.
That's right.
What are your ideas in regards to certification of teachers, of principals, and of superintendents?
Yeah. So credentialing and certification is something I'm happy to spend some time talking about because I got to my job, and part of my job is the credentialing process. So what that means is I have to read a whole bunch of rules. And what became apparent to me as I began to dig into this body of rules that were coming across my desk is that it seems that there are some opportunities to streamline the process. So one day I was reading and I got across my desk, I got some ELA credentialing regulations. Now what we had is for ELA teachers, we had an ELA regulation for educators in grades 5 through 8, and then I had a separate rule for ELA credentialing for educators in 5 through 12. And I thought, well, that's curious because there's some overlap associated with those, so we'll figure out what the difference is. I read the rules, and I have to tell you, they are exactly the same. There was no difference whether you were a 5 to 8 credentialing standard or you were a 5 to 12 credentialing standard. So then I began to ask myself the question, well, what is it we're trying to accomplish with this credentialing? And I realized in the rules we enumerate a number of different academic standard contents for the teachers of ELA. But what was interesting, and those are referred to as the 500 rules. But we also have something referred to as the 306 rules, and the 306 rules are academic content standards. And it seems like the person who was writing the 500 standards dealing with the credentialing didn't necessarily confer with the person who was writing the 300 regulations, which are the actual standards. So I'm thinking that this body of knowledge can be synthesized so that it's much more efficient in terms of, and aligned, right? So that if you're being credentialed and you're expected to have certain academic standard content expertise, it's the same content expertise that we expect relative to the course that's actually being taught. So part of my job will be to help align that information.
More than 60% of New Hampshire high school students who attend the community college system of New Hampshire need remediation in both math and in reading. How do you plan to address the fact that New Hampshire high schools graduate underprepared students?
So it is disappointing for all of us, I believe, when students get out of high school and they need remediation either in math or they need remediation in English. And I will tell you that I was recently exposed to some information that indicates that there is also an area of remediation potentially needed in civics. And so yeah, exactly, right? And so I think I come back to personalization. Like it's not good enough for the bell to ring and we move on. We need to make sure, if it takes 4 years to get that kid through Algebra 1, let's make sure we don't, just move him on, that we make sure that the students get the content that they're going to school to get.
I actually have a follow-up on civics. Can you grade currently what's your assessment of civics education in New Hampshire today? You just mentioned it, but possible.
I don't think I've spent enough time to assess that. I have been provided with some kind of outside the system information relative to civics from an organization, and that's all I have at this point in time.
What are your thoughts about how New Hampshire schools can support the gay, lesbian, transgender, and questioning youth?
Yep, so I think we have to support all of our students, period.
Do you know, how do you plan to foster the creativity and innovation you have spoken of?
So how I intend to foster the creativity and innovation I have talked about is really working with folks in the system who have already begun good work, right? And I hope to be able to come alongside them and encourage them and give them, share with them my ideas and work with them to try and help elevate the entire system. So that's my goal.
There are some questions about, I believe it's House Bill 356, the conversation about the organization of the Department of Education.
Okay.
And so there are a number of questions about that. I guess the first one is why have you tried to do it? What is the purpose behind that idea?
So, and I know that Reaching Higher is here today, and that they videotaped my testimony, and they would be happy to provide that to me, I assume, and I'm happy to be put it out on the web, so that if somebody wants a more elaborate explanation, they can hear the testimony. So when I arrived at the department, what I discovered relatively early on in that process is that commissioners prior to my joining the department had moved functions around within the department without fidelity to the law. So you see, in the New Hampshire statute, 21N, for those of you who are looking for it, it enumerates the organization structure, and it tells you within each of the divisions all of the enumerated activities that each division should do. Commissioners before me obviously had realized a need to move certain things around. So as an example, in the Division of Program Support, it is enumerated in law that the Division of Program Support will contain the nutritional services programs. A commissioner prior to me took that out of the Division of Program Support and moved it into the Division of Educational Improvement. I believe, I haven't checked this, but I believe that the commissioner probably did that because nutritional support is a federal program, and all my other federal programs are in the Educational Support Division. And so I think she probably intended to align nutritional support federal programs with all the other federal programs. But that's not what was reflected in the law. And so if I were to have fidelity to the law, and I assume you would like that, then I would need to move that back over there. Another example is that our teacher credentialing responsibility is enumerated in statute under the Division of Program Support. It was interesting. Division of Credentialing is run by a young woman, Nicole, and when I first got to the department, I sat down and I was meeting with everyone and understanding what it was they were doing and how they were doing it. And Nicole described to me a very great, all the good work that she's doing in the Division of Credentialing. And when she finished, I said to her, "Oh, that's wonderful. How do you like working with Ed McKay, who is the Division Director of the Division of Higher Education?" And she said, "Oh, I don't work for Ed McKay. I work for Scott Manatee, who is the Division of Program Support." So here what we have is we have credentialing, which is listed in law under the Division of Educational Improvement. It is actually reporting to the Division of Program Support, but it probably ought to report to the Division of Higher Education. And so I think what I was trying to do is say, you know what, instead of me just moving these things around without fidelity to the law, I will go and I will ask permission. I'll say, like, okay, legislature, clearly things have been moved around before me, and I'm assuming if they move things around, I'm probably going to need to move things around as well. So can we create this opportunity to do that? And so that's exactly what we did in that law.
Will we ever have the specific option to take our tax dollars that come from property taxes, as you described earlier, and send them to the school of our choice versus the local public school?
I have no idea. I don't know. You have to talk to your legislators. They would have to pass some law for that to take place. I'm not sure.
What you have been describing in your earlier comments about your vision for the state can be supported by the so-called SWIFT model as well. If SWIFT federal funding is eliminated, would you find creative ways to maintain and grow this important program in New Hampshire?
Yeah, so I actually just recently was meeting with our SWIFT team because we do have a relatively large grant, and I will tell you that that funding is in jeopardy and it may not continue.
Can you explain what SWIFT is, because we don't all know?
Yes, I think I remember what it is. It's one of my many programs.
Integration. But all of us don't know that.
Right. So I'm not sure that I can tell you the details of what the SWIFT program is myself at this point in time. I don't recall the specifics of it. So.
Okay.
Somebody in the audience could.
Okay. If you remind me. Yes. There she is. There's my SWIFT person. She's going to be so disappointed in me. I was meeting with her just the other day. Tell me SWIFT again. Oh,
It's school-wide integrated framework for transformation.
There we go. Okay. And don't we have a conference call with Kansas coming up, and we'll be working on it. I'm so embarrassed. She's in charge of our SWIFT program at our school.
School-wide integrated framework.
Can you say what that means in practical terms?
Yeah.
She has that. I'm okay with that.
Are you okay with that?
Yes.
So,
Sorry, Cynthia.
all right, thank you very
Sorry to
much.
put you on the spot.
Here's our SWIFT director.
Integrated Framework for Transformation comes from a $24 million grant from the federal government that went to University of Kansas. New Hampshire is one of 5 partner states that work with the SWIFT grant, and we have partner schools, and I was hired last year by the Department of Education to scale up schools. And it is about inclusion, and it's about making sure that all of our children receive an equitable education. So it goes on 5 domains: administrative leadership, multi-tiered systems of support, which is both academic and behavior, integrated organizational framework, parent and community engagement, and the policy and structure piece. And everything runs using implementation science for continuous cycle of improvement.
See, I told you I had good people working for me. Thank you. And I apologize. This is another one of these acronyms, and I'm trying to learn all of them as quickly as I can.
Commissioner, next question. How do you balance the
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. How do you balance the personalization of learning with the huge mandated testing requirements in New Hampshire now?
Right, so I am looking for as many opportunities as I can so that testing is not so disruptive to the education process. Yes, I'll take that. One of the opportunities that we have with that regard is that under ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, there is the possibility that right now we use what's referred to as a summative test at the end of the year. It tends to be disruptive to a lot of the educational processes that are taking place. Under ESSA, there's an option that we may be able to get to use interim tests. So we would basically be able to do the testing throughout the period rather than all at one point in time. As well, we are looking at testing options that can provide us the same degree of reliability without as much disruption in terms of the intervention into the classrooms with the testing, by just being smarter with how we deploy the psychometrics.
This is a question about resources that you would employ inside the Department of Education. You've talked a lot about the engagement by parents. In what ways and how often will leaders from the New Hampshire field and members of the New Hampshire Department of Education be engaged by you to assist you in leading New Hampshire education?
So I think we have a really good example of that today, don't we? In other words, so here we have our SWIFT expert, and I thank you for being here, and to be able to help me. So if there's a perception somehow that I somehow am touching every single thing, I am trying as hard as I can, and even though I've been on the job for a short amount of time, to learn all of the different programs that are taking place. But I rely on a team of folks that really do know their stuff, and they're working very hard, and I appreciate their support. Thank you.
Should the moratorium on school construction aid be lifted?
Right, so I believe that the House budget that did not pass included $10 million for additional building aid. We still are in a situation of paying off our tail, for those of you who recall what that, those are associated with projects that took place before that we're still paying for. And in this biennium, we have about $35 million still of spending to go on that tail.
Philosophically, what role do 21st century facilities themselves play in an excellent education? And as a follow-up, because it's related, do you believe that they should be included in the definition of adequate? Facilities.
Yep, so the 21st, well, this is the Title IV money, so it really wouldn't fall into the adequate education. And most of the Title IV Century 20 or 21st century programs that we have are integrated into our schools in a great way. I was just recently in a program, and it was very exciting to see how that Title IV program had actually been implemented, because it was really engaging for the students in such a way that there were students who, while they're not formally part of that program, were staying after to get supports and help from the educators who were in the after-school program. So that's how effective it was.
Can you share a little more of your own background experience that's leading you to today's philosophies? In knowing that your children, for example, have been homeschooled, your own education experiences, how do they lend themselves to your philosophies as Commissioner now?
Yep, so I would tell you that for ever, as far as I can remember, I have been passionate about education. Oftentimes people look at the fact that my wife and I, we home educated our students, they say, oh, he doesn't like public education. No, I think education is so incredibly important and is maybe one of those factors that is the differentiating factors for students in terms of their ability to succeed or not succeed, that I was not even willing to delegate that to anyone. I took 100% responsibility for my children's education. I often say to people, I know that the person who did my introduction was stumbling over the fact that we have 7 children, right? She was like, 7 children? She thought for sure there was a typo there, right? But what I will tell you is today, if previously I had 7 children, I now have 172,000 children. And I want to make sure that each of those children has an opportunity to get the best possible outcome for them. And that is what I'm working for every single day.
The question about developing positive pieces, parent voice, performance assessment, competencies, things like that. Is it possible to do those independently of bringing choice into the equation of the conversation? The question is, can you do that rather than shift the course with these savings accounts?
So let's talk about choice then. And again, so there's a presumption in that question that choice always has to do with money, and I'm going to continue to deconstruct this conflation that seems to occur again and again. And what I will say is, oftentimes when we talk about choice, we talk about choice as if it's kind of school A or school B, or school B or school C. And it's a zero-sum game in which the advantage is if B gets the student, then somehow A loses, and if C gets the student, somehow B loses. I want to take the conversation about choice down a level. I want to talk about it at the curricular level. I want to talk about it in, Parker Varney, one of our elementary schools that blends the K through 2 and says, here's a choice, because that student who is in K but needs to be working on 2nd grade information, there's a choice that that student can accelerate to that. I want to talk about the student in the middle school yesterday who was in, I'm going to get this right, so 6th grade and is working on 9th grade math. That's choice, right? And so let's not let the choice conversation and this voice conversation be conflated down to such a narrow slice of the discussion. Let's make sure that choice is something that we all embrace because it will allow students to excel.
Doesn't that bill have a fiscal bill?
There are a few questions about public funds for religious schools, and one question asks about your philosophy on that, but specifically says, doesn't that clearly violate Article 6 of the New Hampshire Constitution?
Right, so I am not a constitutional scholar, nor am I a legislator, so that will be a topic that is decided by the legislators.
While New Hampshire has a very good public health outcome, we know that over 1,000 teens will become pregnant in New Hampshire this year, and 1/2 of STI cases will occur in young people. We also are seeing recent and overdue scrutiny on issues such as affirmative consent. What will you do to increase awareness of sexual health in schools, and how do you see schools tackling these difficult yet necessary subjects in a modern and timely way?
Yeah. So what I will tell you is, again, it's going to be working with the schools, and we have another one of our excellent staff is a woman named Mary Steady, I don't know if Mary is here, who works on these programs to provide supports into to the schools and the community to help them stand up these programs that encourage young people towards good outcomes for their lives. And so we will continue to provide those programs and come alongside the schools that are working on these things to help them. And the reason why you do that is because when you have good outcomes there, you have good educational outcomes, right? If if a young person finds themselves in one of these health dilemmas, it can be disruptive to their educational opportunities, so we want to help them.
This is a geographic specific question that I appreciate. Coos County is the largest county geographically in the state of New Hampshire, but oftentimes the most forgotten. We have small communities and small towns, and our schools, the public schools, are the focal point of our lives. What protections, what plans, what are you going to do to help the North Country?
So I don't have anything specific to emphasize the North Country because I'm looking at schools all over the state. What I will tell you is that I too have a certain affinity to the North Country and have, even in my short tenure as the commissioner, spent quite a bit of time up there. because I recognize that you suffer or you struggle with a lot of challenges because of a lot of the economic issues up in that area. So I am there for you, I've got your back, and I will be helping you, but there's not a certain carve-out program associated with the North Country.
This is a question I was looking for when we were talking about the bill to restructure. This is essentially a question talking about the current division directors. Can you assess what type of job they're doing right now, how they're doing their job? Is this about the type of work they're doing?
Yeah, so in statute, we've got 4 division directors that are enumerated. One of those division directors has never actually been funded, so it doesn't exist now. It didn't exist under my predecessor. So even though it's enumerated in statute, we don't actually have the division director, so their performance is kind of a moot point because they don't exist. I've got another division director who is preparing for retirement at this point in time, and we are in the process of recruiting an additional person for that. And I've got 2 other division directors that have been in their jobs for a certain amount of time and are working hard and doing a great job, and I appreciate their support and their service.
I've got a question here about engaging teachers. I'm going to put 2 of them together because I think they come together nicely. One is the broad stroke of how you engage teachers in reaching your goals. You've talked about parents and personalized education. And as a follow, a separate but similar question is the teachers are overstressed, underpaid, they work very hard, on average working 60+ hours a week, developing their own curriculum, their own lesson plans, on average a large classroom number of students, many pages to grade and critique, not a lot of resources to do their jobs. How do you plan on working with our state's teachers?
Right, so first of all, teachers, thank you for the work that you do. And I think what we have to recognize is in education. I mean, normally we have we've had a lot of topics here today, right? And the other topics that we haven't talked about, we talk about standards, we talk about assessments. Actually, we covered that. But really, if you think about it, education happens when the educator intersects with that student. And I think of this as a magic moment. And I call it a magic moment. Sometimes I refer to it as the milk moment. And what I mean by that, I'm being sort of silly here, but milk expires if you leave it out, right? It will spoil. But that interaction, when an educator interfaces with the student, can happen once in the time-space continuum. And if you don't take advantage of it when you have it, you can't recapture it. It's gone forever. And so what we need to do is make sure that we are supporting our educators so that they can make the most of every one of these educational interactions that potentially we can create for them. How I will support them is to continue to work on policies such as the credentialing, to make the credentialing a lot clearer and easier for you and straightforward. It's an administrative thing that I can do. How can I help you? I can work with your superintendents and I can work with your communities to encourage support for your schools and the work that you're doing. How can I help you? Is to continue to find opportunities to support and encourage this personalized learning so that you can have these 21st century classrooms that are going to allow you to meet the needs of every student that is there.
This is a follow-up just came in, I think, on this. You're very interested in curriculum, and I can't blame you, but the more difficult implementation problem is the overtired transportation and capital. I'm sorry, thank you. Overhead, transportation and capital expenses. How can you help towns with falling public enrollments and hence dollars? How do we lower the overhead like transportation and capital expenses?
Yeah, so that's going to honestly, those are going to be local decisions. I think it's your question over here. The local school boards are the ones who are deciding those local budgets in terms of what that community is going to invest in their school facilities and their building programs. We talked a little bit about building aid right now. I can advocate for building aid, but I don't get to appropriate that. That happens in the legislature. The same thing relative to transportation. Those are the bus, circumstances that you have to deal with locally. So, I'm happy to support you, but those are local problems that I think the local school boards are working every day to try and solve. And so I appreciate the work that our local communities are putting forth to solve those.
We're running towards the end. I still have a lot left. This one is a long question, but I'm going to chop it down because it's interesting. It's a different type of a question. Studies show that mindfulness and meditation practice lowers stress, increases self-esteem, lowers behavioral issues, and helps the practitioner feel more connected to themselves as well as those around them. Recent studies have shown that connection is the opposite of addiction. How do you plan to help our teachers, parents, and students to lower their stress and increase self-esteem and sense of community?
Yeah, so what I intend to do is, as I've described, is, promote parental voice in the system so that and if you think about that concept of parental voice, we're trying to connect the families into the school more closely so that there is a sense of community in terms of the educational outcomes for the students and for the families and for the school. And so I think that is one way that will help us realize that everyone in that process has some skin in the game and is engaged.
The question is about meditation.
Do you
It's an educational tool being used as an alternative to discipline in school districts. Are you familiar with it?
Oh, as an alternative to I don't think it said that in
I don't think it said it either,
question.
but I'm just
Okay.
as a layperson, I've read about it. I'm just curious if
So
you're
it's
familiar
worth
with it.
explaining. So moving on, do you feel that the government has a duty to provide a minimum level of security and education to New Hampshire children?
So I'm sorry, repeat that. There's too much.
Do you believe that the government has a
I wasn't sure which question it is.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Do you believe that the government has a duty to provide a minimum level of security and education to New Hampshire?
So I will tell you that there is one thing that keeps me up at night, and that is that we would have some type of a tragedy take place in our schools. So anybody I've visited a lot of schools, and everybody knows that I'm always asking questions relative to the security of the students and the securities of the facilities, because honestly, oftentimes there's some very simple things that can be done to make sure that we don't have a problem with security. There is our Homeland Security Director, Perry Plummer, often talks about the painted rock by the back door. And you all know what that's for, right? To prop open the door so that you can sneak back in. And so the point is, I'm cognizant of it. I think it's important. If our students are not safe, then learning will not be taking place.
Commissioner, watching our time, we have very little left, so if you wouldn't mind taking the last few minutes and perhaps sum up your thoughts about your vision about public schools and moving forward as the Commissioner of Education.
Great, thank you. So I just want to thank you all for coming out today. We covered a lot of ground. I hope that I've answered most of your questions. I know some of you are satisfied and some of you are not. But I am working every day. I am working every day and giving you, and really giving our students 100%, because we have an opportunity here in New Hampshire. For many years, New Hampshire has led the country, as I've described, and led the world in terms of educational innovation. Now is not a time when we want to stop innovating. Now is a time when we want to continue to innovate so that we can have the best school system in the world. And so that's what I'm working for, and I hope that you will come alongside me as I come alongside the system, and we all work together to try and make that a reality for our children. Thank you.